A week later, at my home in Florida, my lifelong friend and agent, Danny Lozano, which I wish to thank for listening, for making me listen to him, told me that I was traded to the New York Mets. It was actually the last team that I had managed, that I imagined wanted me, but it was the most amazing experience any human being could have. I can't thank our general manager at the time, Steve Phillips, enough. Steve, you took a chance on me, and I'll be forever grateful.
More of the Zach Gelb Show on Fox Sports 920 The Jersey.
There he was yesterday, the Hall of Famer, Mike Piazza. Had to wait too long, in my opinion, to get the call to the Hall, but he's finally in the Hall of Fame. A fantastic speech yesterday. Really two great speeches by both Mike Piazza and Ken Griffey Jr., and you heard a man that was mentioned in that speech, and it was Steve Phillips, who was the Mets general manager from 1997 to 2003, and he's the man responsible for obtaining my favorite baseball player of all time to New York. And Steve Phillips joins us right now on the Zach Gelb Show. Steve, we appreciate a few minutes, and how are you?
I'm doing great, Jack. Good to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you on today. So when you heard that speech yesterday, and it was a very emotional speech, and he thanked a lot of the Mets brass and also his family and friends. It was a very nice speech by Piazza. When you heard that name, your name, Steve Phillips, mentioned, what was that first thought that popped into your head about the speech Piazza gave yesterday?
Well, I mean, listen, his speech overall was absolutely unbelievable. And, you know, Mike is a very thoughtful guy, very spiritual guy. And he thanked all of those people that had anything to do with his career. And the only part I can take any credit for was bringing him to New York. After that, it was all him. I mean, his production on the field, his interactions with the fans, the way he carried himself, the way he represented the organization, and the fan base is all Mike Piazza. And I think that everybody got a chance to see what a class act he really is. I mean, I don't think people really understood how classy he is. There was no bitterness there about it, the way this all was handled, and very thoughtful and realistic about his entire career. I mean, people need to understand it doesn't happen this way, that a 62nd round draft pick that gets drafted as a favor ends up going to the Hall of Fame. And it was the hard work, dedication, and perseverance that he put into his entire career, that chip that he had on his shoulder, that he felt like he had to continuously prove himself, that he wasn't just there because of a relationship, that he was there because of ability. And it drove him throughout his career. And I think he looks back with a sense of gratitude, which not often players do. And it was a great speech. And obviously I think both for Griffey and for Piazza, the moments they shared in gratitude with their parents, particularly their dads, kind of hit home to me. Having been around Vince Piazza, Mike's dad, for a number of years, and obviously knowing Ken Griffey Sr., it was pretty cool. And two of the best speeches I've ever heard at the Hall of Fame induction. The sincerity, the humility, and the emotion shining through with both guys.
We were reminiscing about Piazza's career last week on the show, and we had a former friend of yours and also a man that managed those Mets in Bobby Valentine on the show. And Bobby V talked about how you told him the news, and he was actually in the bathroom when the trade went down between the Mets and the Marlins to get Mike to New York. And Mike talked about how he went in a shower and he thought he was going to Chicago, and he ended up in New York. Take me back to the day you landed Mike Piazza and how the deal went down.
Well, it's interesting because initially, we were all surprised Piazza got dealt from the Dodgers, that we knew negotiations had broken down, but the Dodgers were a win-now team, and why would they trade their superstar? And then we realized it was an ownership deal that went above and beyond the baseball people. So it was a bit peculiar trade to begin with. Initially, we reached out to Dave Dombrowski to try to figure out what he was going to do with Todd Gio and Piazza. He was going to hold tight for a week, let the dust settle, and then visit making a deal. And then he called back and said, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and flip them now, so if you're in, let me know. And I said, I'll get back to you. And I reached out to our baseball people. We debated it. We all thought what a great addition Piazza would be. Even though we had Todd Hundley coming back from Tommy John surgery, Hundley was an all-star catcher, but Piazza was a whole different level even beyond that. We presented to ownership and got a little bit of a, do we really want to duplicate devil's advocate? Do we really want to duplicate using our prospects to bring in to add to a strength? Why don't we just build around Hundley and use the prospect that way? So we got back down a bit on it. And then a day later, what I did is we regrouped with the business department. I brought in Dave Howard from the business department. We sat down with all my guys again with Fred, revisited the issue, and said, look, this is the time when you're going to go from being that good little team to being a playoff team. Every organization is faced with that moment when you have to assume some level of risk. And this was our moment. And we thought that bringing in that marquee star player would have an impact. It would give us relevance in the market, that we'd be able to afford re-signing him if it turned that way, and that we would play Hundley in the outfield. And that was kind of the thing that kind of put ownership, Mr. Wilpon, over the top. Was we sold. Now it didn't work out all that well with Hundley in the outfield, but it was one of the things I think that got us over the top to get him to approve us going ahead, moving forward with the deal, because there is some level of risk. And then after we got Mike and he struggled, I thought, oh boy, we gave up the prospect. He's not playing well. He seems unhappy. The crowd's kind of turning on him, and I thought, oh, this is not going the way I would have liked. But then it certainly turned, and it turned for the better, and we never looked back.
No doubt about it that it did turn, because, like I said, he played with the Mets organization, and he became that rock star, that superstar in New York, and every Mets fan went on to beloved a player like a Mike Piazza. But when he struggled, when was that moment when you thought he got past the struggle and you knew he would be that player, when you went out there and acquired, you got the player that you thought you were getting?
He had a few games. When Mike was right, he would drive the ball to right center field. He'd drive it, to the wall, through the wall, and over the wall, and that's when you knew he was locked in. And it was just a matter of time. And then once he got back in there and the crowd started loving him, and, you get a curtain call, then it was like, all right, now they're courting him, trying to get him to stay. And then he fed off of that, and then they fed off of that, and they kept going back and forth. And so I thought at the end of the year, despite the fact that we kind of faded in the last 5 games of the season, the last week of the season, I thought overall Mike really had a positive experience with it. I knew that we'd be competitive with the money, and our hope was to be able to get an offer on the table to him before he went to the open market, and it turned into a bidding war in any way. And so we were able to fortunately get him signed during the World Series, an agreement during the World Series, to be able to get that announced shortly thereafter, and to lock him up for the next 7 years as a Met.
He hit many prodigious home runs in New York, and that's an understatement saying that. But the biggest one was the home run in the game returning from 9/11, the first baseball game back in New York from those terrible attacks on the World Trade Center, and also all around our country in D.C. and also in Pennsylvania. Looking back at it, what does that home run mean to you? Because it was more than just the baseball game. And that night at the stadium, you had many people who were apprehensive to go to the ballpark, but when Piazza hit that home run, it gave a city that was in need of some elation a big smile and a lot of noise in that stadium that night.
Yeah, it was. I think it's Mike's biggest moment as a Met, and because it was a home run that was more than just a baseball home run. It was for the city. It was for the country. I think there was even some part of the Atlanta Braves that on that day kind of understood that that's exactly the way the game should have played out. And to consider how the baseball gods had manipulated everything on the field to get to the moment in the 8th inning with Piazza at the plate, a chance to give us the lead. The crowd felt it, kind of knew that this was a moment that they could anticipate a potential, superstar performance. And for Piazza to deliver on cue, it was a storybook ending to an amazing day and an amazing statement for the Mets in Major League Baseball and what baseball meant to the community and being good citizens and giving back to Mets fans. So it's something I'll never forget.
Former Mets general manager from 97 to 2003, Steve Phillips, joins us right now on the Zach Gelb Show, Fox Sports 920, The Jersey. Let's get into this current group of Mets. The trade deadline is not that far away. If you were in the position of Sandy Alderson, what would be some things that you would possibly look at to try to improve this team?
Well, I think that they need offense. The problem that Sandy faces is how does he fit it onto his club? Because, he's got the pieces in the outfield that he wants to get playing time for. They don't fit perfectly together anymore because Cespedes doesn't really want to play center field. Conforto's not really a center fielder. He's more of a corner outfielder. And Granderson is, a leadoff guy who is hitting 234, doesn't hit with runners in scoring position, but he can walk and he can hit one out of the park every once in a while. But they've got some issues. With Duda coming back at some point, they don't need a first baseman because they already have Loney doing a decent job filling in. They're going to have to accept that David Wright is pretty much done with his career, and that the likelihood is that he will only be able to be a role player, extra player in the long run. And I think they should go after an everyday third baseman. I don't think they're going to do that, even with Jose Reyes there, in the thought that Wright next year might be back. I think Longoria would be a great fit, but I don't expect him to do it. So I think they need to add offense wherever they can, and I think Jonathan Lucroy would be a nice addition. It would improve the pitching because of the improved catching. They'd neutralize the running game a bit better, and he would certainly add to the offense and not bottle up any of the other positions if they included Darno in the deal.
You know what it's like to go on out there and make the playoffs in back-to-back years, and you also know what it's like after a year that you make it to go on out and miss it the following year. And the Mets were in a situation last year where if you told me a year ago to this date the Mets would have been in the World Series, I probably would have called you crazy. How much does that experience, though, help from what they were able to gain last year when it comes to being in a similar spot they were in last year to this year?
Yeah, it helps because I think you fall back upon those experiences. I think the challenge is how much of a toll did it take on the pitching? I think that's going to be the real question, that it feels like there was some wear and tear that broke them down a bit, and they're going to need some time to regroup. Now, that doesn't certainly play into going for it this year and being able to make up the ground to not only catch the Nationals in the division, but even to catch the Marlins in the wild card or the Dodgers. So they have their work cut out for them because it feels like they need to be really cautious with probably, 60% of the starting rotation. And that makes it tough on Terry Collins. It makes it tough on the bullpen, and they may need to fortify the bullpen even more. So it's a lot's going to have to go right for the Mets to make that run. But once they're in those critical game moments, that experience should come in handy.
A few more with Steve Phillips, who joins us right now. Let's get to the other team in New York, the Yankees. They trade away the first domino in a bunch of players that they may be possibly trading away from now until the trade deadline, and that's Aroldis Chapman. Do you think the Yankees got a fair value in return for Aroldis Chapman?
Yeah, I think it's fair is relative to, beauty in the eye of the beholder. But I think the one thing that's clear is based upon what they gave up to get Chapman and based upon what they got in return, they made out like bandits. Now, would they have preferred to have Kyle Schwarber back in the deal? Of course they would. Would they maybe have liked a different configuration of prospects to come together? Probably. But when it comes down to it, Chapman's a rental player. And to get 4 players in return, including Adam Warren, a serviceable Major League guy back, did a really nice job for them last year to replace Chapman in the bullpen, or to start if they want to do that. The Gleyber Torres kid is a top-flight shortstop prospect that can swing the bat as well, and he's a little bit of ways away. But I think they did a really nice job because, the one thing to remember is this year's free agent class is a bit down. It's not as strong a class as we've had in recent years. And therefore, the best way to improve your team this offseason will be through trades. And the currency, therefore, that will be important isn't dollars. It's actually talent in the organization. And I think for the Yankees to continue that rebuilding, to get better as they move forward, it's absolutely a good deal and the right deal to make. And honestly, I think they should trade Beltran. I think they should trade Miller. It doesn't matter right now. They're 4.5 out of the wild card. And even if they win a couple games over the next few games, I do not believe they have what it takes to sustain the kind of success it's going to need to be a playoff team or to advance once they're there. They should really look at this as an opportunity to improve the organization.
And when you take a look at Kyle Schwarber, because that was a name that a lot of Yankee fans were hoping to get, like you were mentioning a few seconds ago. But you've been on the side of these trades, and Theo Epstein is a brilliant baseball mind. If he goes on out there and wins a World Series in Chicago with also the curse that he broke in Boston, he'll go down as the greatest GM of all time. So today or yesterday when they were talking about this and leading up to it, they said they weren't going to trade Schwarber. Do you think that answer would have been different if, let's say, the Yankees waited another week to go back and talk to the Cubs about adding a player like a Chapman, especially because the Cubs are in a win-now situation?
I don't. I think that if Brian Cashman thought there was a chance that Schwarber would be available a week from now, he would have waited. I think it was made really clear to him by Phillips. We are not trading Schwarber, so we still think we can put together the best package, the best deal compared to anybody else out there, and he did. I mean, that's the one thing that they did. Because of the depth and quality of their farm system, they were able to take Schwarber off the board and still have the best deal on the table. And I wonder if Miller had been the guy instead of Chapman, where the Cubs could have controlled him beyond just 1 year, whether they might have swallowed hard and given up Schwarber in the deal. But as it stands now, the Yankees claim they're going to hold on to Miller, evaluate the next 4 or 5 days, and then consider where they're going. I don't blame the Cubs for going the direction they did. They could re-sign Chapman beyond this year, justify giving up the prospects, and still have Schwarber in the organization, as opposed to trading Schwarber in the Miller deal, and so they could be ahead of the game. So I think for both teams, it was a good deal. It was a win for both teams, there's no question about it. And the right move that they both should have made.
On the way out was Steve Phillips. So I saw you were talking about how to speed up the game last week, as that was a big topic of conversation with what the commissioner had to say about the bullpens. And you threw out the idea of making the 4 balls and 3 strikes to 3 balls and 2 strikes. Just explain that rationale a little bit, because some people were a bit angry, to say the least, when you threw out that suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing is that, we want to talk about pace of game. And pace of game isn't the time of the game. It's how much time is in between the action on the field. And therefore, if effectively what you're saying is you're starting out everybody with a 1-1 count, and then you're picking up from there, then it's the 3 balls and 2 strikes instead of the 4 balls and 3 strikes. 40% of Major League at-bats right now start with a 1-1 count. They get to the 1-1, and then they continue from there to the decision of the at-bat. And so, in a game where a starter is going to face 28 batters, 40% of those at-bats, the count's going to be 1-1. So effectively, the way I would like to see it with 3 balls and 2 strikes, you're saving 22 pitches per game for that starting pitcher, which means that you're speeding up the game. The action's going to happen more quickly. You're protecting the pitcher's arms, and you're going to reduce the number of pitching changes, which is what Rob Manfred wanted to do. And, oh, by the way, you would not change the number of walks or the number of strikeouts either if you changed it to that. And so for my money, I don't like the idea of shortening it for 7 innings. I think a 9-inning game, 3 balls, 2 strikes. I played it in the Catholic League in the high school back in Michigan, in Detroit. We played 3 balls, 2 strikes, and it was regular baseball with regular scores and everything else. It just didn't take so long for each play to happen, and it kept players in the game and protected pitchers' arms. At the very least, they should try it in the minor leagues, because if you're going to develop young players, why not give a pitcher more chances at more reps to throw that game-critical pitch and protect his arms so that they don't throw as many pitches right now? In fact, I think they should take this in from Little League on to the Babe Ruth, the Legion baseball, the college baseball, and start to protect arms for young pitchers out there.
Hey, Steve, we appreciate the time. Thanks for coming on, and I also want to thank you for bringing Mike Piazza to the Mets all those years, many years ago, because it made my life growing up as a kid a whole lot easier with number 31 behind the plate. So thanks for a few minutes.
Okay, you got it, Jack. My pleasure.